Welcome everyone. Nick Ottinger here once again in Xfinity series for Dover International Speedway. Gonna present you guys some quick tips, some really pro track guide tips here on how to navigate Dover, characteristics of this track, and where you just need to be mentality wise, racing situation wise, and just best avenues to get around this racetrack. For me personally, I think Dover is one of the most quality and really technical tracks you can get in managing your entry speed and finding your points to carry all that momentum that you need to. It is a very technical track when it comes to that. And kind of dive into this, I've done a 40 lap run on our benchmark setup here. I know it's hard to see the full name as it cuts it off here, but yeah, so ran benchmark this week. I've been really running, I would say, the Tata version, most tracks on these videos. So just something to kind of keep in mind in that regard. This is on benchmark once again, and that will be in my notes. And yeah, going to dive into Dover here. This is personally my favorite track to run on any type of, whether it's a truck, Xfinity, or a Cup Series car. And this week we have Xfinity. So the biggest thing to remember at Dover, and it is a very focal point to look into, is how you are looking at your high speed momentum loss. So that is minimizing your high speed momentum loss and trying to find how to navigate into the entry off, turning off the wall, dissipating all that speed, and keeping the front positive and rear connected together. And that's the hardest part of this track because this car specifically goes through quite a bit of transition. And it goes through transitional characteristics that are, going to actually give you a tight sensation, a loose sensation, a slide where you're sliding the front tires, where possibly you're also sliding the front and rear tires. So this week we're going to have some cool track conditions. So I'll show you the weather here, and you can see pretty cool track conditions. So once again, you're going to have some areas where we're going to push the tires quite aggressively. And another thing is we have to manage our tires quite a bit at Dover International Speedway. So it doesn't matter if it's truck, Xfinity, or Cup, you have to manage them. And that is again why it comes into a technical driver's track, because of how drivers manage, keep their momentum, and make sure they're just wrapping or diamonding the line that they need to run. So Dover, very unique track. I'm gonna let this go here in probably about 30 seconds to so you guys can see what one lap looks like. This is 22.8 just to start off a run, and it's a pretty good elevation and diving into a really heavy compression zone of turn one and even turn three. So that's something that's going to change, or we'll probably build freer the turn off the wall into the full compression of one, where the car loads fully, where you feel heavy, the front feels heavy, the rear of the car will start feeling heavy as well from just loading into the bank in the turn one. And same thing for three. So pretty unique track. So I'll let this play for a lap and we'll just dissect and talk about some tips to roll around over with. That's one lap. Again, it's a mid 22.8 in our weather, and you could tell I was never fully off the throttle. So in this package of what we have here, just to give you guys landscape from start, mid run to late run, I've done a 40 lap run, which is really going to be a mid portion of a run because that's you probably can go about 85, 90 laps on fuel, somewhere around there. We'll make sure it's pretty accurate. It's going to change depending on your track temp, obviously how much you're in the throttle and what lane you're running. So that'll change. But again, you see now is part throttle when I compressed into one, and we're going to play this slow here a little bit again. You're going to find your turn endpoint off the wall. You can tell I'm starting to turn away from the wall at this moment. I'm trying to enter into this banking transition as straight as possible, loading the front and rear consistently, about the same type of corner and load that I would want. And you have a blue marker. Let me just back this up. You have a blue marker right here that is a pretty good indicator to where you're going to start getting to almost your max wheel angle when you're loading into turn one. This is going to be just before the pit exit cone to the left. You'll see the green pit exit cone into turn one. And you can tell how much part throttle I'm utilizing. And I'm trying to keep that balance. I'm trying to keep that balance to where as soon as I compress, the rear is going to want to actually bite, and the front's going to continue, since we're on fresh tires, front's going to want to continue pivoting and pointing to the left. So this is going to change through a mid portion of a run and a late run. We're going to build freer by probably about lap 30 to 40 into a run. That's just the reality of it, to where the tires get really greasy, they get really hot. So you got to manage that right rear turning into turn one and three by just keeping a neutral balance. You're doing your best to keep a neutral balance loading into these banking transitions in turn one and turn three. That is where all your speed will be made in keeping that consistent, because as soon as you keep a consistency approach in landing, you're going to have a lot better ability to wrap the bottom near the apron of turn one and two into the center. Same thing in three and four. Or you can have a diamond quality in one and two and then help straighten that exit off of two with less wheel input from center to mid exit of two and vice versa for three and four. So again, very, very important to make sure you're loading into these corners as consistent as possible. If you're dealing with a tight car, just point blank, if you're dealing with a tight car, you may actually come all the way off the throttle later in a run. And if you're dealing with a loose car, you may have to come all the way off the throttle, depending where you're loose. Your most free option is it turning away from the wall into turn one, like where we're at here? Is it free as soon as we actually load into the banking? So, or is it free all the way on throttle? Doesn't matter if we're turning it off the wall into the landing zone or just right into where you see the Dover turn one right here. So that matters at this track, because if you're dealing with handling deficiencies, you're going to be dealing with handling deficiencies at this track. It's just how magnified are those handling deficiencies. So again, kind of speaking on this, you can see on newer tires, I'm going to actually get closest to this apron and not get off of it at least a little bit for a diamond until I pass this Cup Series logo on the right. And I'll come up doing a small diamond quality of technique, about a tire width, two tire widths, and I'll carry that diamond all the way until you see I'm starting to point well before the Monster Mile logo. So I'm pointing back down the hill, but I'm not just completely cutting that corner exit. So you can see I'm cutting it back down. I got the front pointed because at this point, again, at this point, I'm using more wheel input to make sure it's turning. Now I'm opening it up a little bit to make sure I'm not shortcutting that exit. In other words, I'm cutting it too early, hitting this apron off of two, and really, really hurting my lap time and exit of turn two. So I'm keeping this in slow mo so you guys can see the perspective here. The closer I get, on exit here, that's what you're going to want to do. You want to get as close as you can to this apron and banking, so you're actually getting all that grip to the left, right, and really all the racetrack you can have from mid exit to exit of two here. Because this is a really tricky part of racing scenarios, is people have to drive to their limit, and then they'll drive over that limit when they're racing others. And for instance, at center, they'll charge entry really aggressively, and then they'll charge that center in an area where they don't need to. So they'll start overdriving entry, have to slow that center up, and then have to overdrive center again because they're trying to get back to the throttle too much. So they'll get offline, they'll make sure their line is completely different than this, and then they'll get themselves too active in trying to regain that time they lost an entry into the center because of just carrying too much speed and not making sure they have the line and angles they need to have. So to fix that, it's just driving a racetrack. I know it's hard to kind of do in racing scenarios, but it's just driving the racetrack. Let it come to you. Find the weaknesses of what other cars have and other competitors, and realize your strong suits. You know what the car is capable of doing. So again, turn two, very, very dependent on making sure you're not shortcutting this and really just helping straight line the exit. You can tell I'm starting to open the wheel up and you load into a lot of heavy load transfer here and then become light off of turn two. And when you're not pointed correctly and you think you have the car as straight as possible here, there's a load point here and then you go over a crest to where the car actually gets light with the front end. And then you can tell here, look at that. That's even on new tires. Crest, I'm pointing back to the left. Once it actually picks up some lift point in the splitter, I have to counter steer because the rear is also doing the same thing. The rear is getting light at that same moment on, transitioning off of turn two. So that's a quality that has to be understood because you have a small margin of error when you're having to kind of correct or just stabilize it because you're right near the wall. So turn three, going to be part throttle again once I release it, but you'll notice this ally bridge and walking bridge for fans and all that. And you can tell I'm pointed well before I'm turning away from the wall, well before I get to this. I'm lifting before it on new tires, and once I'm going under it, I'm already recognizing, hey, that's the minimal throttle I want to use because that's just what I feel balance wise I need going into turn three here. You can tell I'm part throttle, still keeping part throttle, and I'm loading into this banking with the same amount of part throttle. It's give or take a couple percentage, obviously, but I'm not 100%, 30%. I'm loading into this banking at turn three. Turn three is the more bumpy transition in of the track, what you have to work through. And again, same qualities I have for one and two, but turns three and four, you actually have a lot more capability in three and four because it's not as tight and narrow on really shaping the third mark of the corner. You can actually open that entry up a little bit, and you can tell how much you can carry that center speed into really the center. And you'll notice a light right here, a Munster mile. You see the light right after the Munster mile. You can tell I'm still part throttle. I'm using that same diamond quality that I was talking to you guys about in 1 and 2, about a tire width higher, 2 tire widths higher, and that's going to change throughout the run. That's something that you guys might feel comfortable trying higher than what I'm doing, or keeping it around this apron a little bit longer than what I'm doing. But again, this is determining your high speed momentum loss and making sure you're not taking too much speed away in that avenue. So, and timing where that lowest center speed is, if it's just before center, if your slowest center speed is right at center or just past center, that's something you gotta toy around with and make sure you're looking at. But going past this sign, I'm still above it. You'll see again, just to kind of reiterate, you're going past this light and the Munster Mile sign and on the wall. I'm keeping this angle still up a little bit. And you can tell once I get to this orange commitment cone, the track's kind of keeping the same bend to it, but I'm actually using a little bit more wheel to kind of point the car just a couple degrees more with the front end to manage my part throttle. And this small little window, I'm going to do it slow here. This small window from this box to pit entry barrels, I'm keeping my wheel kind of very minute changes, but I'm also keeping that part throttle the same. You can see part throttle, keeping the car balanced, letting it get low to the right rear to help my straight drive off. But now once I get to that barrels, I'm back to the throttle pretty heavy. And at that moment, I still have to keep that weight transfer as stabilized as I can. You can tell I'm correcting back here, putting more wheel to the left once I know I'm getting back to full throttle, just to keep that stability from front to rear connected. And it's just a couple degrees, as you could tell. So powering off of turn 4 is very similar to turn 2. It narrows even more off of 4 because you're carrying more exit speed on racing scenarios and trying to pass people. So the lower you can exit turn 4, the better, just so you have more room off of 4 to kind of navigate because you have that same light tendencies in the car from front to rear. So another quality you have to look at. So this is just debriefing you guys on cold tires, obviously, but it's very similar in how it approaches from lap 30 to 40. So just to give you guys a inclination, around 9, 10, 11 is where this car in this specific weather with the wind direction, wind speed is going to be noticeably a little bit snug in the center of 1 and 2. That could be snug just before center when you're trying to use more throttle and shape the wheel, and the center could be free, depending on how much wheel you have with throttle, or it can actually stay tight if you're managing the entry how you should and managing that center angle how you should. So that tendency is going to go from 9, 10, 11, and you're going to notice a transition to a free state in middle of 1 and 2 around 25 to 26. That's when the tire gets greasy. And we'll kind of showcase some, issues of, am I carrying too much entry speed? Do I need to actually soften my entry approach? Do I need to get off the throttle completely before I turn off the wall and get into loading of 1 and 3? So I'm going to show you guys lap 10 so you guys can see the difference. Look at this throttle, a little bit less throttle than I used in really the optimal laps of lap 2 and 3 and lap 1, obviously. So similar qualities, keeping some good tension on the car, keeping some good loading points. Let's slow this up a little bit. Yeah. Similar throttle traces, just a tiny bit less throttle and holding my part throttle phase. So similar tendency. Obviously, tires wear here, they get hotter. So the same quality that we used lap 1, just to reiterate, we had all this ability. Oops, you guys seen that wrong. But anyways, let's go back here. Turn 3, I want to kind of reiterate how I'm using just a tiny bit less throttle overall to kind of keep my momentum loss. That's to keep neutral balance into it. And once we get to this phase that I talked about earlier and how you get to this pit entry, box, orange box to this barrel, I'm keeping the same part throttle trait, but I'm actually going to get back to full throttle a little bit later because of how greasy the tire is getting. So that could be a car length after this barrel starts. Could be 2 car lengths, could be 3 car lengths. That's what's going to happen at this track and how you're managing your center speed to mid-exit speed. So it's a quality you absolutely need to remember. That's going to be in the same thing for turn 1 and 2. And this is just lap 10. So that's 10 laps on tires where we fell off half a second, basically. 4/10 to half a second. Now we're going to go to lap 25. Going to notice some differences here. Turning off the wall, I'm actually all the way off the throttle, but I'm not all the way just instantly off the throttle. It's a smooth transition, turning away from the wall, but I'm managing part throttle to keep consistency and balance into where I'm going to the lightest part of turning into turn 1 and then loading and compressing into 1. As you can tell, once I load the fronts here, I'm off throttle. You can see how much it changes balance wise, where this just gets heavy because I'm almost on the splitter at this point. So again, off throttle for a good distance. You can tell it's getting greasy. I have to use part throttle to kind of stabilize the car. And this is the area where it will get a little bit free because of how tight center 1 and 2 was, because of how much you're trying to actually manage your exit momentum and power off the corner. So a little bit free condition again off of 2 because of that transition. Turn 3, similar attributes. Part throttle, loading into the banking, and this is where this track is different. Let's say you have the same wind tendencies that we had in 1 and 2, and it's on this side of the track. You're going to notice I will get out of the throttle as well. But since you don't have to cut the entry of 1 so much as you do 3, and since it's actually a little bit of a wider corner, you have all the ability to kind of your entry can actually go shorter and cut in distance, or you can do that diamond effect to help that, stability effect you need for 3. So we're going to go to about 35 now, so you guys can see exactly what the differences are. 10 lap increments here. Part throttle, and you can tell now the car is free enough for me to actually realize, hey, I can use part throttle to keep the stability I need in this car. And why you see very minimal part throttle is just to keep the car balanced with the rears getting greasy. If I get completely off the gas here and need to use more wheel input, really I'm going to actually change the dynamic of the car and what it's doing downforce wise. Like at this stage, if I'm in the throttle heavier, I'm going to actually use a little bit more of an abrupt change in loading here to where it's being aggressive and pivot in the front and also the rear with it. So this is simply put is connecting front to rear how I need to at this stage in the banking. I can be off throttle here, and if you feel like you need to be off throttle here, that's fine. But remember how you need to connect entry to center with keeping the consistency in connecting the front to rear of this car. So part throttle, I'm going to let us play at speed, keeping part throttle. We're getting a little bit free here. You can see how much part throttle I'm using, and I'm still free. And now I get closest to here, I can actually get back to full throttle to, help my straight drive off. Turn 3, slow this up a little bit. Same quality, same exact probably percentage I'm using in turn 1 loading and compression. This section is going to get a little bit more free, so I got to actually do the same quality of just prolonging that 100% throttle moment. So let's go to lap 40, see how much it actually gets more free. From lap 35 to 40, we basically fell off a tenth. So if you guys have a tight car at this point, you'll most likely feel neutral enough to be completely off the gas. And that's just something you will conserve the rear tires to do to achieve. And again, like I talked about earlier in this video, managing your tires are very important here. And that's a quality we're going to have to do. And if you guys can figure that part out, you're going to be able to get into these racing scenarios with confidence. Real confidence in just managing how you need to get off the corners with momentum. And just because you can get to the throttle quicker than someone at 100% doesn't mean you do it at this track. That's just the facts of this track. You do not want to over abuse your tires, especially your right front, when you're trying to shove speed into the center. And then once the front grabs, because you dissipated enough speed, you don't want that transition from front to rear to be too much to where the rear is too dominant in that avenue. So just something to look at and remember at this track. Remember consistency and keeping the car connected front to rear. If you're dealing with a tight car, don't overstep it. Just make sure you're getting the line correct and maximizing your momentum that you can. If you're having a tight car in entry, that's just going to happen. It's going to have a lot of different handling tendencies at this track because of how much wind speed, wind direction, track temp matters at this track. So, but I appreciate you guys tuning in once again. I'm excited to see how you guys do this week. Please, if you guys have any questions for me personally, do not be afraid to tag me in Discord. Tag me in a DM, asking whatever you need to. But also, this is going to be our first week in really having the full scope of our G61, our Garage 61 integration with TCSP. So if you guys have a any questions regarding that, also shoot them our way, and we'll be glad to kind of help you guys get that situated. So, but yeah, appreciate you guys tuning in. This is going to be an exciting week. I love Dover, and hopefully we have a very successful week once again.